Okay. There we are. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We've realized we're fighting sports, common hour exams, and noblemen. So, understandably smaller crowd, but thank you all for coming. Mines Ratio Christi. I have a couple announcements, and then I will hand it off to our very own Secretary Grayson to give his talk on the resurrection. But Anchor, this Friday, they're doing a board game night. They have food. I've heard that it might be like Chick-fil-A, so it might be worth it to stop by at least to get some Chick-fil-A and play some fun games. But that's this Friday in Marquez 226. It's at 7, so just come join, play some games, have some food, have a great time. We have a group me. I'm sure most of you are already in it, but if you're not, there's the QR code, or you can bother any of the leadership to get it. YouTube, of course, we post all of our videos, so if you ever want to go back and check something out, go ahead and do that. But that's all the announcements we actually have. Quick and easy. But I'll pray us in, and then I'll hand it off to our very own Grayson. Lord, I just thank you that you indeed have risen, that we can celebrate that this past weekend, and I just pray that you'd be able to open our eyes to all the evidence that you have for the resurrection, that it's not just some thing that we just gotta trust on some dude's word 30 times removed, but that we have real evidence for this, that there are sources that we can look to be sure that Jesus did in fact raise from the dead. And I just pray that we'd have a good discussion, that you would just bless everybody in this room, that we can have a really good time eating snacks and having a little time of fellowship as we learn about the resurrection. In Jesus' name, amen. Grayson.
Alrighty. So, just remembered, you can't bump the HDMI cord on this laptop or else it'll start freaking out. It turned all matrixy and green. I don't know what was happening before people arrived. So I'm gonna do my best to not touch it except for the arrows. So, tonight I'll be talking about the resurrection of Jesus. It'll be fun. This is a smaller crowd, but that means it'll just be more intimate and more, I guess, people focused, which works well because I can be more genuine in the fact that I didn't get opportunity to practice. I made the presentation, but I will just be kind of saying stuff off the dome, remembering I put that bullet point in there because I wanted to say this, X, Y, Z, all that. But it'll be fun. It'll be an adventure. So first, I just wanted to give a little outline for what I'm planning on doing. So I want to really clarify why the resurrection is important. I think everyone here knows why the resurrection is important, but it's always good to go over that. I wanted to introduce the historical method that I'll be using, kind of the system of what facts to accept, what documentation is considered valid. I'll then be introducing a minimal facts approach, which will take the widely agreed upon facts from scholars, Christian, atheist, Buddhist, what have you, and use those and build my case out of that, the stuff that everyone agrees upon. Then we'll go into the opposing theories, which there are quite a bit. And I've taken the main ones, stuff that you will probably hear on campus, the same ones that we had out whiteboarding the other day. And then I'll kind of go into the power of the resurrection theory and why that makes the most sense, that Jesus actually rose from the dead. But first, I just wanted to go over the whiteboard. And also, am I blocking y'all's view? Do I need to stand to the side? Luke says maybe. I'll scoot over here and hope the cable doesn't get mad. All right, much better. So we have some of the theories that we're going to be covering tonight. Jesus' disciples removed the body, he recovered in the tomb, he heals the nation, Gospels are just a myth, and then, of course, God raised him from the dead. If you haven't joined us whiteboarding, join us whiteboarding. It's a blast. We had some, I heard, fiery conversations by the end. I wasn't around for that, but I heard that it got a little intense, but it got resolved well. And I think that just means that people were encountering things that they hadn't heard before, and were, getting their toes stepped on a little bit. But it was good. So then, what is the big deal behind the resurrection? Why should we care? Well, 1 Corinthians 15, 17 through 19, Paul writes, "And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins. Then those who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied." Basically saying, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then we're just a bunch of suckers who believe in a lie, and what are we even doing? Need to figure some stuff out. So, the resurrection of Jesus is the cornerstone of the Christian faith. If this didn't happen, then we're toast, basically. So being able to defend it is a remarkably important thing. And I want to clarify that this is different from maybe other religious claims, like the inspiration of the Quran or the concept of karma, in that the resurrection is an event that happened in history. So, being an event that happened in history, you can build a case for the resurrection, a historical case. You can look and figure out what was going on in the time, place, and culture, and research the evidence, the people who were witnesses to these events, and using the historical method, you can come up with a good idea of if this actually happened or not, or happened in a different way that was written. So this book I have right here. It's The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. If you look in the front cover, you will see it belongs to the library of Donald E. Dix, right there. He lent this to me so I could build this presentation, and I have to say this is a remarkable book. It's immensely helpful in defending the resurrection and in just doing apologetics in general. I would highly recommend if you have the time to read or want to expand your library. So then, let's get into the historiography, which historiography is the philosophy behind a historical method. How do you know what to accept in building your case? So I've created two acronyms here. We have truth and fishy. And so truth is something that's probably happened using that evidence. Fishy is something that it's fishy. So if you look, truth, we have testimony from the eyewitnesses, which is just people who were actually there and saw it happen. A rival's attestation, someone who is an enemy of a position, but nonetheless agrees with the opposing group in that something actually happened. That's a very strong piece of evidence because rivals typically don't agree with their rivals on a lot of things. We have undermines witness. I just wanted to make it spell truth, so I phrased it that way. It's embarrassing. If someone says something embarrassing about themselves, then they have no motivation to make that up and undermine their own status unless they were actually telling the truth. If the testimony is recorded soon, chronologically, then that's strong evidence. You don't want to wait like 80 years before you start go to the cops and say your side of the story. It's better the sooner it is. Historically speaking, 80 years actually isn't that far. Our first record of Julius Caesar, I believe, is about 300 to 400 years after he lived. And we don't doubt a lot about what happened with him. So historically, 80 years is actually really good. especially for antiquity. And if there's multiple independent sources, that's also a strong bolster. Because if it's just one guy, well, even in Scripture it says someone needs to be condemned on 2 or 3 witnesses. One doesn't even cut it. And then on fishy, we just kind of have the opposite. A friendly witness, like if your mom says you're an awesome person, that's cool. But if like your arch nemesis says that like you're an honest person, you could probably believe them a little better. Individual's bias and secondhand testimony, a friend told me. Again, few independent sources, one guy saying it, or years until someone says something. Now, we're going to use an example here. This is one that the book uses. We have an intersection, 2 cars, and a couple of people waiting for a bus on the side until that happens. And we have some witnesses who saw, hopefully, which car made a mistake here. One of them had to have a red light. But 2 of our witnesses leave, and 2 other people show up who didn't witness it, and the guy standing next to them says, "Red ran the light." Now, our 2 green folks right here, they weren't primary witnesses. They didn't see this happen, but they did hear from a primary witness. So they are somewhat credible, but ultimately we only have 3 actual primary witnesses. So if these 2 say that blue ran the light, then you have 2 primary witnesses versus 1 primary witness, which is much more weighty than 1 primary witness and 2 secondary witnesses versus 2 primary witnesses. These guys would have a stronger credence to who ran the light versus all 3 of these people, in other words. Now, we can say that this guy might be Red's friend. Now, if Red's friend says that Red ran the light, again, that's some principle of embarrassment in the sense that you wouldn't want to undermine yourself or your friend unless it was true. So if Red's friend says Red ran the light, Red probably ran the light. I think y'all probably get it. It's pretty simple, pretty intuitive. It's not quantum physics. So I think now we can get down to brass tacks and dive into the facts that everyone agrees on. So we have for our first fact, Jesus' crucifixion. And I should preface that I say that almost everyone agrees upon. That's because scholars are very divisive on every matter under the sun. Think pineapple on pizza. That's how it can get. So it's very rare that you will have scholars agree on absolutely everything. So saying most is as good as it can get on pretty much every historical matter. So a high consensus is what you're looking for historicity. And Jesus' crucifixion meets that criteria historically. Basically, no one doubts that this was an actual event in history because we have all 4 Gospels that attest to it. And whether or not you believe the Gospels are credible, you can still see them for what they are as being documents written in the 1st century that are an account during the time that eyewitnesses would have been around. So you don't have to hold to the infallibility or inerrancy of the scriptures to still look and see that those are still historical sources. And that's, basically giving as much ground to the skeptic as possible and saying, sure, maybe these are just, written accounts that have no backing to them, but they still are these historical documents and need to be treated as such. We also have non-Christian sources, which is major. This is that enemy attestation. We have Josephus, who records Jesus' crucifixion. That passage is debated as to whether it was later modified by some Christians. due to some of the wording. There's a hot debate about that, but again, generally all scholars agree that Josephus wrote about Jesus and said he was crucified. Tacitus is a Roman historian. He mentions Jesus' crucifixion in his annals. And Lucian, another Roman historian or writer, mentions Jesus and his crucifixion in his writings. So it's well documented, historically speaking. For the first century AD, having all these sources is very impressive. And I should add, these non-Christian sources were within 100 years of Jesus' crucifixion, so they are very recent testimony, again, historically speaking. And we have this quote from John Dominic Crossan, which I found from this book. Now, John Dominic Crossan, he's on what's called the Jesus Seminar, which is a very skeptical panel. Basically, no one on there is what you and I would call a believer. Very, very skeptical, some odd opinions. And yet, John Dominic Crossan, who basically heads the whole thing, has said that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be, which is a high claim. So that's fact number one. Number two is the disciples believed. Now, the disciples, they didn't just half believe or were pretending to believe, but genuinely believed. And we know that because we have a lot of stuff talking about their boldness, especially in Acts, and also a lot of oral tradition, written tradition in Paul, of course. Paul, oral tradition, written tradition being an acronym for POW, just a handy-dandy one to put in your back pocket in case you ever get in a discussion about if the disciples actually believed. Paul writes in his letters about meeting with the apostles and learning from them and discussing with them if he had, an accurate grasp on the gospel. And I'll dive into that a little bit more soon. But there's also the oral tradition, the early creed of 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. Again, I think that's the next slide. I'll go over that a little bit more. But the written tradition is especially strong in that you have the Gospels again, but also the apostolic fathers such as Clement of Rome and Polycarp, and you also have others such as Tertullian and Ignatius and Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history, recording that the disciples genuinely believed. And the reason why that's a strong argument using those sources is that these are from people who knew the disciples, so primary witnesses of the disciples in their faith, who claimed that the disciples genuinely believed this. So, side note would be the ancient creed. This is 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. It says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." And this image that I have is from Codex Sinaiticus, and it is 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8 in Greek. Codex Sinaiticus being from the 4th century, an old manuscript, bunch of interesting history there, but that's an aside. So this creed is very interesting for multiple reasons. So here I've bolded and underlined some things. You can see that there's some parallelism in the fact that it follows a pattern of saying in accordance with the Scriptures, then item accordance with the Scriptures, then another item. And you also have 4 instances of the word that, and then Cephas as well. Now, the reason why I'm pointing that out is, see what I did there, is because this is evidence that this creed is actually originally in Aramaic and was an oral creed, because Aramaic uses the word that often, in this way. The parallelism suggests that it was used for memorization. It's easier to memorize something if it has a pattern to it that's easy to follow. And Cephas is Peter in Aramaic as well, so that'd be a transliteration going to the Greek. And the reason why that's important is because this would show that Paul, he also says he delivered what he received, another indicator that this is not Paul's own words, but something he heard. And this shows that Paul learned this before visiting Corinth, because he gave this to the Corinthians. Now, we know that Jesus' crucifixion occurred 33 AD, depends on the date that you go with. And Paul converted 31 through 33. Again, most scholars would hold to this. So Paul visited Corinth in AD 51. So he had to learn this before then, sometime before then. And most scholars, again, hold that he learned it when he went back to Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion and talked with Peter and James. As he mentions in the passage, Jesus appearing to Peter and to James. So he likely heard this from their own mouths. So 36 AD is the common date for him receiving this. And again, if he didn't, then he at least spoke to Peter and James, which were prime authorities. They were eyewitnesses. So he would know what they actually believed about the matter, if they did or did not believe that Jesus had resurrected. Because that's what we're really getting at here is, did the disciples believe that Jesus had resurrected from the beginning? Because that will be important later. So, yeah, the Ancient Creed, very, very significant. We have fact number 3 is the conversion of Paul. So, Paul was, a very zealous Jew in the Sanhedrin, had high political power, and then he gave all that up and joined the new ragtag group of Christians. And he did this for the reason that he claimed, that he encountered the risen Jesus on the road to Damascus. Luke makes this claim in Acts, and Paul makes this claim in some of his letters. You can see the references down there. Paul then went on to suffer for this a lot. He records a lot of it in 2 Corinthians, saying that he's speaking foolishly while doing so, and then lists some of the most amazing things that he's been through. It's pretty cool. But he is not the only one who attests to this suffering. Again, there's a lot of early church fathers who talk about this, like a lot. And when I say the latter 3 are cited by Eusebius, I mean that their writings on their own didn't survive, but Eusebius, who was recording a lot of early church history, wrote down their writings, and his work survived. So we have them quoted through Eusebius. And the fact that Paul was willing to suffer for proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus shows that he genuinely believed, because no one suffers and dies for something that they know is a lie. That is unheard of to me, and if any of you have experienced otherwise, I would love to hear it. People die for what they think is true, but never for something that they know is a lie. Similar to Paul, we have the conversion of James. This James is the half-brother of Jesus, the one who wrote the book of James and was a pillar in the Jerusalem church. I chose this photo because it looks like he's wearing a raincoat and is going to try to sell you a Bible or whatever he's holding in an alley. So the Gospels report that Jesus' brothers were skeptical and unbelievers regarding his ministry. It seems like they almost kind of dare him to show up and perform a miracle, which honestly, if you were in their position, you can't really blame them. It's your brother. You grew up with him, and it's like now he's preaching that he's the Son of God. What's happening? So you can't really blame him, but he was skeptical. And again, this is a criterion of embarrassment. If this didn't happen, why would they put it in there? It would be embarrassing for James, being later such an important pillar of the church, to authorize this happening if it didn't actually happen. Because it makes him look terrible that he didn't believe. So, again, that creed in 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus appeared to James, from the words of Paul. So that's the reason that James seems to have converted to Christianity. And he did die a martyr. Josephus actually writes more about James than he does about Jesus, because James was seen as a very righteous Jew. He kept the Mosaic law even after converting to Christianity. He still was very adamant about following the whole law. And you even see that's part of the letter in Galatians, is that some people said that they were coming up from Jerusalem from James to institute some of the whole circumcision and Mosaic law. And then Jerusalem Council happened and stuff got sorted out. But James, very faithful Jew, so his martyrdom was very significant, and due to the fact that he believed, because the Jewish people wouldn't stone someone for just following the Mosaic law in its entirety, but would stone someone for blaspheming, as they would have seen James doing when he pronounced Jesus to be the Christ. So the earliness of the testimony is really the force of this fact, in that it's recorded in Paul pre-51, likely pre-36 AD. So that's very strong in this fact being true. And then the last fact is that the tomb was empty. Now this is one that's frequently overlooked, and this is one that isn't as agreed upon by most scholars, but is just barely below that threshold. That's what this book says. They call it the 4+1 facts for that reason. This is the +1 because it's not as highly agreed upon. But the reason why it is mostly agreed upon is because of these 3 bullet points. The first of which is called the Jerusalem factor, which some of you may have heard about. Can any of you tell me what it is, Mason? Luke?
Is it that it was like only during this specific time period near Jerusalem people were using tombs like that? It would be weird to make it up after the fact.
No,
Okay.
but that may also be a point somewhere.
Never mind.
But good idea. It is a little bit of an odd name for what it is. The Jerusalem factor is the fact that if the tomb wasn't empty, if Jesus' body was still in the tomb, and the disciples begin proclaiming that Jesus has risen from the dead, then the religious leaders in Rome, the first thing they would do would be to go to the tomb and take Jesus' body out and parade it around Jerusalem, saying, "He is not risen from the dead, here he is." But they didn't do that, because, and that would point to the tomb was empty. And some people will say that, well, Pentecost is really when they started doing that, and that was 50 days after the resurrection happened. So the body would have decayed by then, would have been unrecognizable. This book points out that Mortician said that after 50 days, a body would be recognizable in West Virginia, the humidity of the forests of West Virginia. After 50 days, a body could still be identified, facial features and all that. Jerusalem is in a much drier, warmer climate than West Virginia. And as we know, things preserve better in those conditions versus a warm, wet climate. So that is to say, after 50 days, Jesus would still have been recognizable. The Romans or Pharisees could still have produced a body and shut down the whole thing before it took off the ground. But they didn't. Again, we also have enemy attestation. And that's the fact that some of the early arguments against Christianity was regarding the resurrection being bodily or other such things. Never the fact that there was a body. They would say that the disciples stole the body. They would say that some of the objections we're going to go over, but never that there was a body, which it's kind of an argument from silence. But if there was a body, they would have mentioned that in their counter argument. And the fact that they didn't points to the tomb actually being empty. I think the Gospel of Matthew even says that the Pharisees paid some of the Roman guards to spread that rumor around that the disciples stole the body. And they wouldn't ever have done that if there wasn't an empty tomb to spread that lie about. And lastly, we have the women witnesses, which, if you know anything about back in that day, women were not seen as having the same authority as a man being a witness. So the fact that the Gospels record the first witnesses being women, Mary and Martha, that points to them recording the truth. Again, you would not make that up if it didn't happen. And of course, the apostles come later and inspect the tomb. But then another embarrassing thing happens is they don't believe and they're confused. Again, you wouldn't record that if it didn't actually happen, because it makes your leaders of the church look like a bunch of idiots, and that is not a good, face to put up. So those are the facts. Jesus was crucified. The disciples believed. Paul converted to Christianity. James converted to Christianity, and the tomb is empty. So those 5 facts are yes.
Well, just to kind of an add-in on that, just on your fact number 2, that the disciples believe, there's also extra biblical attestation to that as well. Not that Jesus was crucified, but Tacitus, Pliny the Elder, I think Josephus also, I think there's another Roman historian, who all record at least the belief of the disciples that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, that doesn't prove the resurrection, but I think that's an important fact, because no one can say, hey, in 2nd century, 3rd century AD, the followers of Jesus manufactured the story, when in actuality we have Roman historians who are saying these disciples are going around upsetting everything. They're causing a stir, and over this belief that Jesus rose from the dead. So it wasn't a later made up, kind of story about Jesus.
Yes, very, very good point. Yes, the disciples genuinely believed. Now, we can get into some of the opposition. This was the auto-generated slide I thought was funny, so I kept it. So first, we have swoon theory. Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. Now, if you know anything about the Romans, or Roman crucifixion, the first thing you're probably going to think of when you read these words is something like this. Because there's a counterpoint here. That is, Romans were professionals.
Yeah.
You were not getting away off the cross alive. There's no way, no how. Roman soldiers even faced death if they let anyone survive off the cross. The Romans were brutal, and that was one of their laws is if you were a guard and you let a prisoner away or someone who was to be executed get away, you would suffer their punishment. Whatever they were going to be punished for or were being condemned for, you get that instead. So Roman guards had very strong motivation to make 100% sure that they followed their orders exactly. Jesus also didn't have his legs broken on the cross like the other 2 criminals that were being crucified next to him. Now, the reason the soldiers would break the legs is because when you are being crucified, you're hanging and, your arms are stretched out and you have your feet nailed in. So your body is going to be sagging. And what that does is that tightens the diaphragm and the muscles in your core to be in an exhaled position. So you can't breathe. Now, what happens is you have to pull up on your arms, push up on your feet in order to lift up and have control over your diaphragm again so you can inhale. So literally while you were on the cross, you would have to constantly be pushing yourself up on those nails in order to take a breath. So by breaking the legs of the prisoners, you would stop them from being able to push up, and therefore they would asphyxiate and die on the cross. And that is actually the way that most prisoners would die on the cross, is through asphyxiation. John records seeing blood and water come out of Jesus' side. Now, we know now through modern medical analysis that this is actually a real thing that would happen. I forget the exact medical terminology, but your body, in like a last-ditch effort to protect your heart, will essentially flood your organ cavity in your chest with water in order to protect your heart. And this is like dire circumstance, like you're about to die.
Well, that's a normal circumstance.
It's normal.
So you have what's called a pericardial sac around your heart that is filled with fluid to help cushion your heart. So that's normal. And so by piercing the side, they would have pierced this pericardial sac, which would have just a watery fluid in it that would have drained out. So that's accurate.
It's normal.
It's a normal condition, not just somebody who's being crucified.
Gotcha. All right, my dad's probably going to watch the recording of this later, and he's a doctor, so he would also have corrected me.
Yeah.
Sorry. But good to know. But yes, this is attestation that John actually did also witness this, because at the time they didn't have that same level of medical knowledge that we have today regarding all of these things.
You can refer your dad, to the Journal of American Medical Association, 1986.
Yes, that's where this information comes from. They did a study on the effects of crucifixion on the body. It's pretty fascinating. And then the swoon theory suggests that Jesus survived the cross. So let's just say hypothetically he did. The Romans, in a complete oversight, somehow missed the fact that Jesus was still half alive. He would not have gotten up, rolled a giant stone away out of the tomb, taken out the guards, and then presented himself to the disciples as the victor over death, a half-dead man stumbling through Jerusalem. That wouldn't have happened.
Well, not to mention, he also suffered tremendous flogging
Yes.
prior to the crucifixion. So
Yeah, his back would have been completely lacerated. You likely would have been able to see his internal organs because of the tools that the Romans used. That whip on the side, it's kind of hard to see, but it has little bits of metal and bone attached to it, specifically for tearing flesh out of the people that were being whipped. It was brutal. No one is getting up and walking after that. It's just not happening. So, yes, Heidi.
I just realized that if anyone ever had survived a Roman crucifixion for however many centuries they did it, we would have heard about it because it would support this theory and it would be everywhere. The one guy who survived, right?
Yeah.
I've never heard of such a thing.
It's actually interesting you bring that up because Josephus, when Jerusalem was getting surrounded and overrun by the Romans, they would do like mass crucifixions outside the walls as kind of a demoralizer for the Jews that were still in Jerusalem. And Josephus, he had already become buddies with the Roman general at the time, saw three of his friends get put up on the cross and asked if they could be taken down. And the general obliged. One of them actually did survive after that. They weren't up for that long. Two of them died. They also didn't have time to flog everyone since they were doing this in mass. So this would have been just being put up on the cross. And two people still died, and one barely recovered, still with terrible wounds, of course. But again, that's in sharp contrast, very different situations. I just thought it would be interesting to bring up. There was a guy who did survive, but because he was taken down very quickly.
Yeah.
Um,
They intended to let him go.
Yes, and they intended to, and he didn't have lacerations all along. So, Jesus did not survive the crucifixion. There's no way. The second theory is a conspiracy theory. Disciples conspired together to steal Jesus' body and pretend that he resurrected from the dead. And, I could go into a whole bullet point as to why this didn't happen. But there's also the Babylon Bee. So, we're going to play this.
I need 100% participation for this to work.
Yeah, everyone's here. All 12, 11. 11 of us. What's the plan?
Well, as you know, Jesus is dead. But stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I have a plan. We are going to steal his body,
Okay, I'm tracking with you. What's next?
and then we're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Wait, come again. Could you go over that last part real quick?
Oh, what? We get murdered. What's the problem?
I like it. I like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pete. I love me a good hoax as much as the next guy, right? What's in it for us? Do we all get riches, fame, and fortune first, right?
Now, get this. You're going to be hated, persecuted, and reviled for the rest of your life.
Okay, guys, tell us. Look, I gotta be missing something here, right? Okay? I mean, why on earth do this? Can we start over?
Okay, we'll start from the beginning. Everybody for John, another disciple.
So, okay. We go down to Jesus' tomb.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Then we pay off the Roman soldiers that are guarding the tomb with their lives.
Why would they do that?
Hey,
We somehow roll away the big stone that's in front of the tomb. Obviously, you have to move the rock first. Yeah.
then steal his body.
Yeah, I guess.
Then we tell the whole world that he rose from the dead, and we get brutally murdered for our troubles.
Frick, bro.
Okay, guys. And then what?
Then we all get killed.
Come on.
When do we see ourselves become exalted and praised?
That's just it.
You don't. What is happening? Anyone hear what I'm saying? This is the most idiotic plan of all time.
Chill out, bro. Do I really have to explain the joke to you? Look, it's that we lie about Jesus' resurrection, and then we all die.
How am I supposed to chill out when our heads are getting cut off? Or worse, what is wrong with you guys? Thomas. Okay, look, back me up here. I know you can't be cool with all this. I know you gotta have some doubts. Come on.
Now?
Oh no, how did it die? Shit,
You guys have officially lost it, okay? I'm out of here. I'd rather be exiled to a deserted island than spend another minute with you wackos.
I got some good news for you.
I think that gets the point across. So, yes, the disciples, why on earth would they do that and then proclaim that he rose from the dead and get brutally murdered it doesn't compute. They would steal the body and not eventually have their epic prank crumble. So the other objection is that the disciples stealing the body doesn't account in the slightest for Paul or for James, who would have been enemies of the church and have no reason to convert. Additionally, they would have seen Jesus crucified, and in the Mosaic Law it says anyone who is hung on a tree is cursed by God. So they would have seen Jesus as being cursed. Again, another, tally to not follow. There's also the objection of what if someone else stole the body? Someone who wasn't the disciples. And you have to ask what the motivation would be for that. That someone else would, again, sneak past the Roman guards or bribe them or what have you, steal the body and hide it and then remain anonymous. And if it was done by someone who did not support Christ, then after they see the disciples proclaiming that Jesus had resurrected, then there's no reason why they wouldn't just produce the body and, again, shut the whole thing down, the Jerusalem factor. It also doesn't explain Paul or James. They still converted to Christianity, and that needs an explanation. And then the disciples, again, they somehow believe that Jesus rose from the dead, even though they would have never seen him because the body was stolen. It's just explaining the empty tomb, not how they came to actually believe that Jesus rose. So then we have the myth theory. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with Zeitgeist, the movie. I think it's on Netflix. It's this interesting film that is not historical at all, that will make any historian have an aneurysm, saying that, Christianity is just a combination of all these ancient myths, and that's you see up there like the 12 disciples equals the 12 constellations, and Jesus is the sun. That's why he's the Son of God, because he's the sun. Exactly. So I just have it here because it's kind of a representation of an example of the myth theory that it's particularly number 3, their resurrection accounts in other religions, and Jesus is just another example of that form of myth. The other two objections are that the story that the disciples saw the risen Christ is actually just an accretion of a continuously progressing story that gets more and more fantastical as time goes on. The second objection is that the disciples actually never meant for the resurrection of Jesus to be taken literally. It was only ever a fictional genre of writing in the Gospels. And the response to each of these is that, for the first, the claim of the resurrection can be traced back to the disciples. You can't say that it was an accretion or a modified tale, but because we have that early oral tradition and the written tradition, we know that the first disciples believed Jesus actually rose from the dead. Paul came to believe apart from the disciples' testimonies. You need to account for that as well. He converted, and it wasn't because of anything that the disciples had said. And again, this could be said for many things, not even just things regarding the resurrection, but making assertions is not evidence of it being true. You have to back up. Why do you think the Gospels are evolved stories? Like, do we have an unevolved Gospel, for example, of like an earlier dated? So the second point, the disciples never writing in a historical genre, that doesn't explain why the tomb's empty. we see a lot of the objections. If you try to cover one of them, you're losing, an explanation for this, or if you go over here, you're losing an explanation for that. So if you try to explain that the disciples weren't writing history, you have the facts of history that still need to be addressed. The empty tomb, the conversion of Paul, the conversion of James, the critics arguing against a literal bodily resurrection. And they're arguing against this early on again. And they wouldn't be arguing against it if that wasn't the claim that was being made. And then John 20:31, where he says, these things are written down so that you might have faith and believe. They are not writing in a mythical genre, which would have existed at the time. They are writing in a purely historical genre, which also existed at the time. And also earlier for Paul, he would have known how to distinguish between a fictional writing and a historical writing. He was rather educated, if I dare say. For the third point, if you actually look at those accounts of different religions and read those stories of dying and resurrecting gods, you'll see that they have basically no correlation to the gospel story. For example, you'll hear Osiris mentioned often. I mean, have the whole Egyptian stuff up there, for example. So Osiris allegedly came back from the dead. Actually, he was cut up into 14 pieces, scattered throughout Egypt and the underworld. 13 of those pieces were gathered together, and kind of a zombie version of Osiris came back. And it's not at all a bodily, literal resurrection in the same way that the resurrection of Jesus is. And that's likewise for all of these stories. They just don't align. Maybe in the most abstract sense they align, but once you get into a single specific, it all falls apart. And the first story that actually does resemble the resurrection of Jesus that another religion can claim isn't until 100 years after Jesus resurrected. So you can maybe see that there was some plagiarism happening at that time. Additionally, if you examine the history of these other religions and their claims, you can have alternative explanations that seem just as powerful. And you can't do that for Jesus' resurrection. As we've seen, you're covering these and not that, or you're covering this and not that. Another common objection is psychological phenomena. The disciples hallucinate. So you have hallucinations, delusions, visions, and then 4, conversion disorder, which isn't like a religious conversion, it's something different, it's just called conversion disorder. I'll explain what that is here. Again, sorry if it's hard to read, I'm not a graphic designer. You couldn't win with the text color on this one. A hallucination is defined as a false perception of something that is not there. For instance, if I think I see Mickey Mouse standing in the corner, that's not how I saw you look. It's not actually there. Do you see Mickey Mouse, Luke?
Yeah, I saw him.
Okay, Luke's hallucinating right now. This is a prime example. A delusion is a false belief that one still holds when evidence to the contrary is known. I think you can maybe classify flat earthers into that category of we have overwhelming evidence that the earth is not a pancake, but yet they still exist. Then a vision, there's several definitions, I'll get into that. But conversion disorder is a neurological medical disorder involving sudden blindness, seizures, paralysis. Hope I got that right. And it, in this case, would be attributed to Paul on the road to Damascus. He has this blindness suddenly come upon him because that's a thing about conversion disorder is it can be just happen out of the blue. And there's no real physical reason as to why it happens. It's a strange disorder. but this book talks about it because evidently it comes up as an explanation. But if we dive into each of these, we can see that for hallucination, there's actually no such thing as a real group hallucination. An example that was talked about in here is Navy SEALs. They have to go through this incredibly hard week of training, and they will hallucinate because they haven't slept in over 72 hours. And there's some testimonies from an event where they have to paddle out like 3 miles into the ocean as a team. And there's some crazy hallucinations that happened. One person saw a wall that they thought that they were going to paddle into. Another person saw a train coming at them on the ocean. A bunch of wild stuff. Another person saw an octopus reach a tentacle up and wave. But you won't get a group hallucination seeing the same thing. Even if, say, people were stranded in the ocean and were hallucinating, and they all hallucinate like a boat. Say one person says, there's a boat over there. And then another person, since they want there to be a boat, they hallucinate a boat as well. Where if the boat gets closer and you look and you see that there might be some numbers on the side, likely the numbers will not line up. People will hallucinate different details. And if the numbers do line up, that's a real boat. You should get their attention. So there's no group hallucinations. And again, empty tomb needs explaining. Paul and James needs explaining. Too many variations in these occurrences of hallucinations, because you have men and women, outdoors, indoors, in large groups, individually. Everyone would be hallucinating the exact same thing of a bodily resurrected Jesus. That doesn't seem very likely. A delusion would say it was a grief-stricken delusion that the apostles sincerely believed that Jesus had resurrected. Empty tomb, Paul, James, again, they need explaining. James and Paul would have no incentive to convert to Christianity or be stricken with grief over the death of Jesus. So them converting needs to be explained. Visions are a little more complicated because there are quite a bit of things that people can call visions. A subjective vision is just a hallucination. Again, if it's a single person experiencing a vision, like Mickey Mouse being in the corner. I saw you do it again. Then that's a hallucination. An objective vision is based in reality. That would be, kind of like God speaking to someone in a dream, where God is actually influencing that dream and actually there and speaking with them. That's because there's an objective reality to that vision. It's not just a trick of the mind. If a vision was subjective, it would just be a hallucination. If it's objective, that means Jesus actually did resurrect. The debate would just be if that was a bodily resurrection or a spiritual resurrection. But he did resurrect if it's an objective vision, because he is back. And if it's a vision genre, which would just be a kind of myth, then it's a myth. So that line of reasoning applies. And the last one is conversion disorder. That could only explain Paul's perspective, really. It's rare, and also Paul doesn't qualify for any of the most likely candidates for conversion disorder, which are people who are adolescent, low IQ, women, and in low economic status. Paul does not qualify for any of those. He would not be a likely candidate to have conversion disorder. And again, does not explain the empty tomb. You would need to stack on other theories in order to have conversion disorder fit into there. And that would appear ad hoc, where you're saying, no, it can't be a resurrection, so it has to be this, where you're not actually looking at the evidence and coming to the best explanation of the data that you actually have. It seems like you're just saying, well, it can't be that, so it has to be all this. So lastly, we get to the actual resurrection theory. which accounts for the belief of the disciples. If Jesus actually rose from the dead, the disciples would believe that he rose from the dead. I think that putting that together is a pretty solid logical conclusion. This accounts for the conversion of Paul. If Jesus rose from the dead, then Jesus could appear to Paul, and Paul could convert to Christianity. Likewise for James. If Jesus rose from the dead, he would not be dead in the tomb. The tomb would be empty. And the resurrection has the most explanatory power because it doesn't need any other theories assisting it to support it. It can just stand on its own. But wait. What if multiple theories are true? Well, then it becomes a probability game. So say you can assign a probability to each of the theories. These are just numbers that I made up. Say there's a 15% chance that conspiracy 2 happened, which is someone else stole the body. Say there's a 10% chance that the disciples hallucinated and came to believe that Jesus did resurrect, which is drastically high after seeing that no group hallucinations actually happened. But say 10% chance that it did. And say Paul had an epiphany on the road to Damascus that, oh wait, Jesus was the Messiah and he saw the light. That's an actual explanation that some people have, is that it's just metaphorical language in Acts, that Paul saw the light and came to an epiphany. He didn't actually get blinded by any light. It was just metaphorical language. So say that happened, and that had a 30% chance. Well, in order to see the probability of this theory working together, since this would account for everything, say James is thrown into that hallucination category too, you have to multiply those probabilities together. And that gives you a nice number of 0.0045%, or not percent, just chance. So even with those very high percent chances of these happening, you still have a 0.45% chance that this theory actually occurred. It doesn't really work. And this book mentions that using Bayes' theorem, the Oxford philosopher Richard Swinburne attempted to demonstrate that the actual probability of the resurrection occurring is 97%. Because if you can give probabilities to every other possibility and figure out what the chances of that happening, and you have a last item that you don't know the probability for, but you just subtract every other probability from 100%, and you get the percent chance for your last item actually happening, 97%. So if you want Jesus to have not resurrected in a supernatural way, you need to put together a story. And that story might look like something like this. Yeah, you need to do something like that. That took me like 2.5 hours to figure out, by the way. I do not regret it. But now, it's your turn. So, get in a group of, 3 or 4. We don't have that many people. Maybe just find a partner and try to make a story which would account for all the variables. We don't have 15 minutes really, so we'll say 10 minutes. Try to make your own hypothetical story as to why Jesus couldn't have possibly supernaturally risen from the dead. And then, after you make your theory, you'll be switching with another group, and they will be poking holes in your theory and explaining why it doesn't work. If we have time for that. Do you think we do, Carl?
Sure, why not?
Let's do it. So find a partner.
I think a good way to start is like, okay, who do we have to account for? We have to account for the disciples.
Doing a good conspiracy frame of mind here.
For
Yeah,
like
that's the hard part.
And
James,
this might help.
Paul.
What would you come up with?
James and Paul. We have to account for like all the other scholars that kind of like
somewhere that's poking holes in our story. I reference like that.
wrote about it.
It's like they don't really have any reason to lie about it.
No, right?
I'm trying to think if there's any other major groups.
Thing right there.
No, I think
Carmel?
I wonder how someone gets like
I feel like disciples, James and Paul, and scholars is like that.
I don't either. That's a new one. I don't know. It feels
I guess like
So they should come down.
story to this
First.
the resurrection, you know.
/ second hand.
It's the point of the exercise.
Yeah.
Those are like the ones that we can kind of look at and be like, okay, those are like, because like you know, like some of the scholars probably weren't there to see the empty tomb, but they heard from the disciples, saw this evidence.
Actually an alien.
So you have to account for the disciples, James and Paul, and the scholars.
It's like just a science cat. It's your best way to discover that.
For the disciples and James.
Heard the alien that still do
So the
stuff.
aliens also had to
Say,
come down,
yeah.
have to have some vision, the light that
I don't know how you read what he
It's like
Roman soldiers
Read up on the scriptures.
hired to guard Jesus' tomb. The medieval story. They were so
Like, I guess
angry
mine
that someone
is
could
this
God,
mass
the
hysteria,
body to
but
surface.
even then, that doesn't
And so they took it and like the face
make a whole lot of sense.
elsewhere and just made it into the two.
Interesting.
It
So
has to be
they're
like so God didn't resurrect
Okay, thanks. I
So
think
the
they're
disciples
not.
all
They
individually
have
knew that Jesus rose from the dead. And James was in it the whole time. All the other brothers were just the ones that were skeptical.
so
Paul's just crazy. And the scholars were just lied to.
It was never closed.
Ugh.
Yeah.
as far as I can tell, that would be the best stuff.
Yeah.
No, I think it was like you said, like maybe something went wrong during the transport. They lost the body, like Monty Python style, or they were so enraged by the thought of Jesus and what he was trying to set out and convince people of, lead people away from the Roman state and worship like God or for him, and it made them so angry that they went to face the corpse. They didn't want to honor it with the burial or
therefore,
You accounted for James.
No.
Better tie up that
So that explained the body, but then
The idea that someone else stole
Because
the
I'm also
body.
just thinking, it's like, okay,
I
could there have been
actually-
an
I've never
individual
even
group
that
that just really wanted
idea
to
forwarded
mess
and
with
just-
everybody? Somebody who didn't die for it
There's someone out there that
and like
yeah.
wanted to convince everyone else.
Okay.
So
Like, my
let's
thought is like,
Yeah,
okay,
you know, hey.
pick our idea
James-
first.
Yeah,
And
and that wouldn't have gotten
they're
corrected
not just mad at
in the next
Jesus, they're mad
two or
at the
3 days.
disciples for
No,
propping them
nobody
up,
does.
giving them a
Yeah.
platform.
wasn't a skeptic of Jesus.
Yeah.
So,
so did everyone.
they tricked the
He
disciples
actually liked him.
and impersonated Jesus and just wild
Yeah,
Christian
I-
because they know if they keep spreading the word.
you created.
What?
You created.
Yeah, that's the
All
hard part.
things and entirely different thing.
Buildings around.
We don't know.
Yourself like
We know.
Jesus.
Yeah,
His
yeah,
disciples,
I should probably write it here.
That's what he died for. So he had to count
It
him
will
like he needed that.
inspire them to
Is
go
he
out
an
and spread
apostle?
the word.
No, this is James the half brother.
This will
Right,
end
okay.
Inspired.
so we don't have to get our hands dirty.
Doing
James the brother of John.
Brother.
Yeah, okay.
This is James that wrote the book of James.
You don't have to describe either.
Funny.
How
Terry.
I mean, all the Marys could be one.
Cooking a little bit.
Etc. Just say like an independent group.
There we go.
Because they saw an opportunity. So they weren't gonna die for it.
There you go.
They.
Okay, so those are the only two stories I have. Why the tomb is empty. Either he never died or something still alive. Anything else that would hold up for his longer than for someone to just laugh at it.
Or accepted.
Disciples and everyone.
Here's how he explained Paul. They found the important person there in a faraway land because they couldn't have someone that the disciples just recognized seeing him around town. So they go bring the impersonator from Damascus. And he happens to run into Paul on the way back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there was an alien, I guess.
So,
James.
It's funny, the disciples.
Yeah, I know. For the thought exercise.
I don't find that compelling. Gullible people are everywhere. Every other explanation you come up with requires the
He's
disciples
just crazy.
to not really believe it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the linchpin.
So is James.
It's a tiny little thing, but you pull it out and everything falls apart.
Mass hysteria.
The number 3, the fact that the disciples actually believed instead of just making it up.
I think it's like, okay, the independent group got a Jesus look-alike, that won't work. Yeah.
Big difference.
Critical. Where was it that the disciples saw Jesus? Were they in Jerusalem?
Okay, we believe, we don't think it happened.
Was just
Maybe about 3 more minutes.
Believe it.
just so.
And so they went from there. So that this is how it's in for accepted theory. Is because the disciples they believed it. Now, what? That's sort of
Disciples.
that's why.
This doesn't actually like explain it.
I think the story.
Yeah, they want to inspire the disciples and make them think the resurrected like they would need to do. I guess this whole story would have come from the presentation. They just rouse up the disciples and get them to continue on their mission.
There were so many witness accounts.
Because they know that the Lord inside the Roman Empire, when the disciples would know after witnessing the resurrection, seeing Jesus would inevitably end up with their death.
Just got together. Okay, so this is the story.
Others.
You say this, you say disciples have to actually believe others. And then we're all kind of down because we're
subject to the same lie.
Let's see. So let's say they stole the body. Okay, where did they put it?
Like,
In the bushes.
They kept it in the morgue, for example.
First, he's always believed her. But it was never skeptic.
You do it.
I think another biggest story is the stories that the Roman soldiers
There's 1 more minute.
wouldn't have it in them to start their own campaign like this.
Yeah.
Knocked out the guards.
Try to be where.
Yeah. Just like, even if it wasn't, just right.
I
Oh
was
yeah,
just
Jesus
writing things.
couldn't accept that he was dead. Right? It's like Paul was just suffering hallucinations. Disciples were made up as characters to support the belief in Jesus. Scholars and others were subject to the same riot.
When asked with this person, don't think they're gonna scheme and stuff up. Just have to do it.
So do we wanna say
15 seconds.
that Jesus never died or that they stole
I'm
fire?
just gonna name this the funny joke.
Alright.
Protect himself.
There's our proof.
Alright. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils down. Okay. There you go.
Alright.
Are we allowed to look now?
Yes, you may look at their feet.
Roman guard.
Alright. Let's see what we got.
The disciples face Italian abduction. Aliens took Jesus' body.
Looks like Jesus told us to go break the truth.
Able to
Kill.
overcome crowds and do a memory.
Who's the disciples?
Disciples thought Jesus was resurrected.
Cast down Judaism.
Scientists,
Coincidentally, Pharisees.
science is the best way to explain things. Large not exist.
Never explained it.
So you gotta explain that.
This is just about as ridiculous as ours.
So Jesus must have somehow resurrected himself.
The disciples being made up.
So they're saying resurrection.
It doesn't really explain the fact
Never like
that
originally sourced from
the disciples see the holes in his hands.
Yeah.
Like,
How would a doppelganger be able to walk around just fine?
So they're
Holes in his hands are all inside.
yeah, like there's medically not.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just gonna write would
They need probably.
have to
Like somebody had another piece.
Yeah. Maybe like, oh, the disciples are some other stuff. Like, how do you really know that? Like, how can you predict that, what the effects are gonna have?
still survive. Still survive. And
That's it.
without in good enough health.
It has to guards. Body.
True.
What's in it for him? He do this. Like maybe he's getting paid by the Romans. Get paid a lot.
Or in a country.
Jesus.
So, yeah, it does have no idea that stolen bodies were fed for the pigs, made it disappear. It didn't, the disciples started making a game.
But from the disciples' perspective,
They all died for it,
they would have
so.
known this was possible because Lazarus would come back from the dead.
I think James would recognize that I'm inside
Jesus,
Right.
They
kill
all
you,
went
I'd say,
crazy.
James, like old people.
Yeah.
Just like a thing hinges on a bunch of independent events happening.
and then if there was shooting drugs, then
To lead people to say
Did
no,
you have drugs back then?
as Grayson said, it dies. It's very unlikely.
Yeah.
Now you gotta explain a whole bunch of other miracles too.
Just for nobody else.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd say it's the same.
not, yeah, not everyone is different. So that,
Yeah. If it's monetary,
I felt like
who's gonna be paying
Maybe Jesus was an alien.
restart a problem?
accounts, like all the accounts of like Mary and everything would have to be explained. Seeing,
I mean, I
like,
think that's a little simpler than.
I mean, seeing an angel and the guards passed out, like, just
even if they could steal some far away,
Mary's
Their own
they must have faster than light
It's
travel.
like a light
That's
rock.
how they need the body disappear.
They would need, I think we've seen instances where
Well, yeah.
parts, so it's like,
Evidence proving or disproving.
in this situation, it's like,
So,
that would be good.
Because they're saying, based on that,
Lack of
They have to be either
evidence.
planetary side, Jesus actually did
Argues for that, as far as I'm concerned.
some
We'll
people.
have to explain all the other
How
accounts
do you?
of it.
We need to write this down. Hinges on too many independent events.
But there was
I mean, I don't know, they,
If the Romans were using Christianity to deface Judaism, then turn into a machine to try to stamp out Christianity.
yeah,
And then Christianity then spread like wildfire despite that.
Are they gonna try
Who's paying?
Yeah, I think there's been some there. That's just interesting. They brought that and tortured them.
It's like original sources hidden by the disciples.
So we know that
Anyone
crucifixion.
claiming aliens did distort
No,
need some evidence.
not serious.
I've never seen.
30 seconds.
Prefer just
From turning into a machine to stamp out Christianity. Just think of Christian soldiers. You know,
Yeah.
I can't remember leading them out.
we're trying to be ridiculous. That's the problem.
And then at the end, we're trying to use a little crane.
Yeah. Time.
Crane.
Alrighty. Does anyone want to go first? Explain the theory that you received and your argument against it.
We'll go. Go first. All right, these crackpots are very insistent that naturalism prevails. God can't exist, and so there has to be some naturalistic explanation. So they actually tried to opt for three possibilities. Maybe one or all of them happened. So one is that somehow Jesus actually did resurrect himself. The stone had to have been rolled away. That he rolled away the stone, and people saw him, and that happened.
Just naturally.
Just naturally healed himself. But of course, we know from historical record the brutality of the crucifixion, and nobody would have been able to do that. I mentioned to Grayson, there's some people who want to throw out there that actually crucifixion never really happened. That just the crucifixion itself was just a made-up thing. But we have archaeological evidence that shows even in, there's a display in the British Museum where they unearthed a body of somebody that had a spike driven through their heel. So the Romans even took crucifixion to Britain and were using it there. So it is a real thing. So then they also suggested that maybe the disciples did steal the body, and they just disposed of it by feeding it to pigs or whatever. But there's the whole idea that the disciples would never have anything to gain from that they had everything to lose. They were reviled, they were persecuted, many of them were martyred. Thousands of Christians were martyred for this lie, so probably wouldn't stand up. The other thing is we have in Corinthians, we have a testimony of 500 people. Paul points to 500 people saw him. Go talk to him. So it was a verifiable claim they made. And then the whole possibility that they were smoking dope. But that just falls under the hallucination category. If people are smoking drugs, do people see things? Yes, they do. But would everybody see the same thing? No. So I'm sorry. Lose.
Another one bites the dust. Devin, you wanted to go next?
Yeah, we can go. Ours kind of went on the idea that the Roman guards, showing contempt for Judaism and the claims of the disciples, decide to deface and hide Jesus' body. Disciples genuinely believe body's gone, and then that there's a doppelganger that looks like Jesus and goes around and does, like, explains the Paul situation, the James situation, all this stuff. And it just doesn't particularly hold up because the one point that we brought up was, I mean, the disciples saw Jesus very close and spent a lot of time with him, and the doppelganger would have had to talk like him, all this stuff, and also suffer the same wounds because, I mean, it was obvious that he had, like, been crucified just by the holes in his hand, his feet, and the stab in his side. So it's like he would have had to gone through a Roman crucifixion and survived, and then been well enough to travel the country long distances to both meet Paul and James and meet with the disciples and do all of this stuff all in a very short time. And just talking about James, I mean, it's his brother, even if it's a half brother. I feel like he would probably know his brother pretty well and could tell a doppelganger, even a good doppelganger, from his actual brother. And then we kind of got into the accounts of all of the disciples, Mary, like all these people that claim to have seen Jesus would still have to be explained, and even the ones that like didn't necessarily see Jesus, or even if they did, if they saw the doppelganger and somehow believed it, it would still have to account for them seeing like the angels or seeing God or like the ascension, like all these things. It's like it just doesn't quite hit those points. And then Eric mentioned a point of if the Romans, like the Roman guards, were really using Christianity to kind of deface Judaism, why would they let it spread so far? And like, why would they almost immediately try and stomp it out again if they were really trying to use it to deface Judaism?
And if they also had been trying to use Christianity and then they tried to stamp it out, why would it then afterwards spread like wildfire?
Exactly. They would have kind of shot themselves in the foot there. That's what they were trying to do. Yeah, good defense. Also, a good job bringing up the angels and those other details of the resurrection, because didn't have time to get into that, but that's very much a part of it. So good job. All right, who wants to go next? Mason?
So this was an interesting one. So aliens actually took Jesus' body, so he was abducted. The aliens were able to overpower the guards and then do a memory wipe. The disciples thought Jesus was resurrected because of Lazarus. He was resurrected, and so, but they didn't know about the aliens. So there's some mix up there of like, okay, well the aliens, but we don't have any evidence for that. Paul and James were both overwhelmed by the power of persuasion by the disciples, and then Paul had an alien encounter. So there's a little bit of inconsistency here because Paul claims that he saw Jesus, so is Jesus an alien? So then why would he be abducted by other aliens? That doesn't really make any sense.
It's all aliens. The angels in the tomb, aliens.
But
light
where is your
on the-
evidence
The
that
light on the road
aliens
to Mount,
exist?
aliens.
You have a
Come on,
burden
it's
of
all
proof.
aliens.
Also, explain faster than light speed travel. How did they get here?
Oh, come on, details.
Oh yeah. And then also like Lazarus. Okay, so I mean, Jesus was standing right there, and he spoke, and then Lazarus came out of the tomb. So like, where are the aliens in that? So a little bit of inconsistencies there. But yeah, like there's no proof, and then also like we have overwhelming. There's a lot of accounts that they saw Jesus, and so it's like there's no where's the evidence essentially. That's really all I can say.
Yeah. I think
That's the big hole. It's not just that the body was gone. people were claiming they saw, you know. So you have to have, it's more than just how do you account for a missing body?
The aliens brought it back to life.
It was a puppet. He inhabited his body.
And then they like sucked him up into a ship, and that was like,
Be aliens.
yeah, it was aliens.
It was aliens!
I swear.
Good job, Mason. Alright, Luke and Hunter.
We had the pleasure of debunking the funny joke theory. So this theory posits that an independent group conspired to dupe everyone because it's funny. Or perhaps they stood to benefit from some monetary gain. They say that James had always believed and wasn't ever a skeptic. He possibly could have suffered some grief-stricken repression to help deal with the death of his half-brother. Paul was only suffering hallucinations or conversion disorder, and the disciples were made up as characters to support the belief in Jesus. And finally, that scholars and others that record their historical account of Jesus were just subject to the same lies. And so our rebuttal is that this hinges on too many unlikely independent events all happening in conjunction. We were confused exactly on the motivation, because that would be a very messed up sense of humor, try and dupe people on something like this. And also, if it was for monetary gain, who would be the benefactor that wants to fund something like this? And we also have that we do have record of original sources that were penned by disciples, and so it doesn't line up with them being made up after the fact. And in general, everyone would have to be really gullible, which may be the weakest rebuttal we have to this, because people can be very gullible.
I think there's also the fact that they would have had to synthesize the Gospels and the entire New Testament, which, have you read that? That it's a little bit deep. I think it would have been a very high effort prank if that's what it was. Pretty unlikely. But yeah, y'all did a good job. And I know we're a little over time, so I can just kind of pray us out and then y'all can be free to go. But thanks for coming. Dear God, thank you for allowing us all to come together tonight, even if it was a little smaller of a crowd. God, I thank you for just everyone who did come. And I pray, God, that you have allowed each of us to grow in stronger sense of conviction for the truth of your resurrection. God, I pray that you give us opportunity to use these apologetics in the future to demonstrate that we do have a reasonable faith. God, I just pray that you would be with us as we go forward to spread your word, and that you can help us just be the lights that you want us to be, and help us to trust you in everything. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
An applause for Grayson.
And next week we have Dan Polsgrove, our astrophysicist,
Yes.
coming. And if you wait, I can give you the copy.
You can tell all your friends.
So you can tell all your friends, yes.
The Star Wars call.
I'll play it again.
That was impressive.
How did you do that?
Yeah. One more time. One more time.
Make a YouTube short out of this.
Is that in PowerPoint?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. That's the thing, is like it's not perfect, but it is like really, really good.
Two images, one in the background and one that's more in the foreground for the text to disappear behind it.
Oh, and it's like faded.
And it's like a soft edge.
And you just like
Just
you had
slowly
to tilt
move.
the text back and move it just like slowly up.
Yeah. I'll exit out.
We should stop the recording now.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That way everybody doesn't have to watch us nerding out about PowerPoint.